Good evening, friends. A warm welcome to all. The banks have started sending the mails for the bank audit, and today the webinar is on bank branch audit and GST compliance. Bank transactions under GST are pretty critical and complex as banking operations involves a variety of transactions like issuing checks, draft, card, issue processes, ATM operations, credit wing, securities, LC, net banking, cash picks, and reward points, loans and advances, deposit, point of sale, transaction, etc. Banks and NBFCs have also involved in different nature and volume of their services such as lease transaction, hire purchase, actionable claims, fund and non-fund based services, etc. Many members ask whether the statutory bank branch auditor is liable to audit compliance of GST during the year. Yes, since it is a statutory audit and therefore the auditor is duty bound to check the compliance related to GST and also to report if there is material non-compliance in relation to the GST. If the amount is material, then the auditor needs to issue the MOC also in relation to non-compliance. And for this, we have a guest speaker, CA Yash Dhadda. He is having a working experience of over 10 years in the field of indirect taxes. He was a special invitee to the Indirect Tax Committee of ICA for the term 1819 and 1920. He is also on the panel of CII as GST, Service Tax and Excise Advisor for industry members. He has represented ICI in Regional Advisory Committee Rajasthan under the aegis of Chief Commissioner of Excise and Customs Jaipur. He is a founding core member of study group of ICI on GST research and upgradation matters. He is also a mentor of a pan-India committee of indirect tax professionals named GST World. He has written handbooks on principles of classification for goods and services under GST and also on casual taxable person for IDTC of ICI. As his patient, he is also engaged in grooming young professionals of CA, CS, and MBA on the topics like soft skills and professional life management. And we have with us none other than CA Vivek Khuranaji. He is the founder of CA Sansaar and his name is just enough for the CAs. Now, I would request sir to welcome him and give him a welcome address. So please.
Thank you very much, Tuti ji. CA Yash Dada ji, a very learned speaker and very good friend. CA Stuti Majan ji, all other respected members who have just joined us. A warm welcome to all of you, and my sincere thanks to Yash Dada ji for accepting our invitation and giving his valuable time. My seriously, I want to say the thanks from my core of the heart. You never say no to us. Seriously, hats off to you, and a speaker like that. So that's why we are proud of you. So as Tutiji rightly said, today's webinar is very very important because now GST is everywhere. Either you go for the tax audit, then also you have to go for the GST compliance. If you go for the bank audit, then also you have to go for the GST compliance. And sometimes we are very very busy into the MOCs and the NPAs, but somewhere we ignore the GST compliance. But yes, as Tutiji said, GST compliance is also the statutory requirement and it's mandatory for the bank branch statutory auditor. Yes, G will guide us about that. And one thing I just want to tell all of you कि हमने इसके ऊपर काफी सारे वीडियोस नॉट जीएसटी अदरवाइज बैंक ब्रांच ऑडिट्स के ऊपर मोर देन 30-40 वीडियोस ऑन ईच एंड एवरी टॉपिक बट ऑन जीएसटी आई एम हैंडीकैप्ड आई डोंट नो एनीथिंग अबाउट द जीएसटी स्तुति जी हैं एक्सपर्ट एंड द यश जी आर द एक्सपर्ट विद अस बट वन थिंग जस्ट आई जब जो स्तुति जी ने कहा तो मेरे माइंड में आ गया like she said ki if there are some materiality or irregularity then we have to report we have to go for the MOC but like one circular जिसके ऊपर हम already discuss कर चुके हैं in our webinar one circular is into the social media still now it's not on the RBI website पहले तो था कि RBI ने मार्च के जो notification circular थे was not into the RBI website but now it's there 21st मार्च तक सारे circulars हैं but that circular is not on the RBI website जिसमें वो था 80 to 75% तक का कहीं भी वो नहीं mentioned है one thing just I want to tell and another thing if that circular is genuine then check your appointment letter so in your appointment letter like Stuti said ki irregularities you have not only you have to report into the LAFAR or the MOC but yes you have to report to the MD then CEO and then also to the ACB तो 3 persons इनको आपको जितनी भी irregularities हैं have to report that, either it's for the banks related, GST related, you have to report on that. So that yes जी will also guide, but I just want to give you an idea about the that circular. तो आप अपना एक बार appointment letter, उसमें engagement, terms of condition, everything please go through it. तो will not take so much time, क्योंकि स्पीकर के पास एक बार माइक आ जाता है ना, then they start speaking on that. But will not take time. Yes ji, now it's over to you. My sincere thanks once again to you.
Thank you so much, Vivek ji. Thank you so much, Stuti ji. It is always a pleasure to come to this platform of CA Sansaar. In fact, I just to share with all the members and with you also, somebody was telling me few days back कि आप CA संसार का part हो गए क्या officially? The number of times you come there, and I say that I always enjoy coming here because the questions which the members give here and the love which I get here is something for which I'm very grateful of. So thank you so much for this opportunity, like always, and it's a pleasure to come here. Okay, I'll just share my screen. I hope you're able to see my screen, sir.
I love that part.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you so much, sir. Okay, so as Tudiji and Vivekji rightly mentioned, that first of all, this bank audit for chartered accountant, it's like it's a very important event for all of us in our professional lives every year, right from the starting of the empanelment and the allotment of the branches to conducting of the audit, finalization of the reports, and then obviously then the central statutory auditor signing the financial statements. All of this whole process, which lasts for almost 1.5 2 months, everybody, invariably every chartered accountant who is into practice is into audit, is somehow connected with this bank audit. In fact, I know many people who only do audit for a limited purpose, but whenever this bank audit season comes in, they are always very interested to actually go to the bank, understand, and then obviously give their services of the attestation there. And rightly so, because I think this is that one area where we are able to actually exercise our independence properly. We are able to utilize all our auditing skills, and because we are racing against the time, because that's also a very important key factor when we're doing the bank audit, and that's why that energy doubles up when we are doing that. And now when we in that background, that whatever we have been doing over the years in terms of the traditional audit of basically expressing our opinion, checking the advances, looking at the all NPAs, raising of MOCs. As rightly said by Vivek ji, because GST is now a part and parcel of every transaction, it becomes very important that when we're expressing our opinion on the financial statements, we also look at it that the financial statements which have this component of GST, which is average size in terms of value, the average size of that is between 10% to 12% of the total size of the financial statements, be it on the expenditure side or on the income side. It becomes very important that we are aware about the basic provisions of GST which are applicable on the banking sector. What are the key compliances at the branch level, at the zonal level, or maybe at the CSA level, which one auditor has to take care of, depending upon wherever they are basically, or in whatever capacity or whatever size of the branch they are auditing, or or the zone they are looking at, and then accordingly move forward. So we will try and compile all of these things together. We will try and look at all of these provisions in a very simple language, not going into too much of the technicalities, but only for the auditor, so that you have a ready reference, that keeping apart whatever general compliances in GST you look after, you see, or you're aware of, you're also aware about the specific nitty-gritties in respect of the banking sector. No doubt, the guidance note which has been issued by ICAI, that has a specific chapter, I think starting from page number 719 in the guidance note 2023, which has a detailed chapter regarding what are the applicable GST compliances that really one needs to take care of. So I have also taken references from there, plus also from my experience the other things which I could think that all of us should be aware of. What is the main product which we are looking at today? The main product which we are looking at today is basically money. And interestingly, money under GST, it is neither goods nor services. So, but yet we know that because GST is applicable only on supply of goods or supply of services, and because money is neither goods nor services, in fact, banks, they deal only in money. That's the product actually which they are giving to the customer. That's the product, or that's the item which they are taking from a customer, and their customer is both the person who is to whom the money is being lended, and also the person from whom the money is taken as a deposit. And because this money is outside the scope of GST, one obvious question which comes in is, then what is that thing in context of GST which we have to look at? Again, for obvious question, we have an obvious answer. And the obvious answer is that today banking is multi-dimensional, and we are not only looking at the lending of money or taking of money as a deposit, but we are talking about use of money, we are talking about conversion of money, we are talking about various aspects around that money, plus other products which are being offered by the banking. Now, why it is important, मतलब this question should come in the mind of the auditor कि ऐसा तो कभी नहीं हुआ कि when we were doing bank audits before 2017, कभी हमने स्पेसिफिकली सर्विस टैक्स की क्या प्रोविजंस एप्लीकेबल है बैंकिंग सेक्टर में, उसके बारे में कभी चर्चा करी हो, या वैट के जो प्रोविजंस है उनकी चर्चा करी हो. Why are we doing that now under GST? And the clear answer to that is because under GST, now every state there is a specific requirement to take a registration, and there is also a requirement that all places of business in a particular state you should make them as part of your additional place of business. So because registration generally under GST is state specific, that is why even if you're looking at the transactions at the branch level or you're looking at the transactions at the zonal level, earlier before GST, all of them were centralized. There was a centralized compliance under service tax which was being done. So there was one service tax return which was with filed for all the branches together across India, maybe at the head office. So there was only head office who was concerned about taking care of the compliances. Now it comes down to the states, and when it comes down to the state, it becomes even more important that branches are aware about the provisions, and because they are issuing the necessary documents to the customer, they are receiving the documents in terms of the services or goods which are being availed by them, so they are keeping a proper track of it. As we all know that when we do bank audits, we are dealing with the accounting softwares which are not routine softwares which we otherwise see in other clients, and more specifically those the softwares like Tally, Busy, and all those things, but rather we are dealing with the ERP, be it in form of Finacle or SAP or Oracle. Hence, it becomes even more complicated that because we are not as well versed with these ERPs as we are with the Tally. Hence, to extract the data, to understand the terminology, and to link it with the specific legal provisions wherever it is applicable, that sometimes becomes a challenge, but obviously it throws new exciting opportunities for the auditor. On an overview basis, we know that in banking generally the major chunk of revenue which comes either at the branch level or at the higher levels is in form of interest on the deposits or the loans which have been given to the customers or to all those people who want to take money. And because that has been exempted, that is why predominantly their outward supply has a big chunk of the exempted portion which is not leviable to GST or which is exempted from GST. Having said that, apart from that, there are other types of receipts which a banking company would generally have, depending upon how do they account for it, which is still taxable under GST. And hence that is why you see you take bank as an assessee which has an exempted and a taxable supply both, and in that context you have to understand what is that head of income which is taxable and which is exempted, whether the bank is taking proper care of it to identify that in terms of exempted they are issuing documents accordingly which are required to be issued for exempted transactions, And in terms of taxable, they are issuing proper tax invoices. बैंक्स के केस में एक और जो एक डिस्टिंक्टिव फीचर है एज कंपेयर टू अदर असेसीज इज द टाइमलाइंस फॉर इशूइंग द इनवॉइसेस and the manner of issuing the invoices are not similar which are applicable for general assessees. So that timeline of 30 days from the completion of service is not applicable on a banking company. Issuing of a proper tax invoice, which is a mandatory requirement for general service providers or supplier of goods, is not applicable for the banking company, and they have been given certain relaxations. Okay, now when we look at it, as I pointed out in the starting, that money, which is one of the most, which is the actually core product in which the bank deals in, it is neither supply of goods nor supply of service. When you look at the definition of service under GST, it's a residuary kind of a definition which says anything other than goods is a service. But then it also says that money and securities are also not services. But then it says that activities which are relating to use of money or conversion in one form of another, for which a consideration is charged for use of money and conversion, is a service. मीनिंग देयर बाय जो सेंट्रल प्रोडक्ट है मनी अपने आप में ना गुड्स और सर्विस है, बट कोई भी एक एक्टिविटी जो किसी बैंक ने करी है फॉर अलाउइंग दैट यूज ऑफ मनी टू देयर कस्टमर एंड फॉर अलाउइंग दैट यूज ऑफ मनी फॉर मे बी फॉर अ टेम्पररी पर्पस, जिसको जनरली हम लोन कहते हैं, उसके अगेंस्ट में अगर कोई स्पेसिफिक कंसिडरेशन चार्ज करा जा रहा है, देन दैट कंसिडरेशन comes within the ambit of definition of services. उसको सेपरेट एग्जेम्पशन है या नहीं, दैट्स अ सेकेंड एंड अ सब्सिक्वेंट क्वेश्चन. एंड हेंस दैट इज व्हाई अगर आप इस बैकग्राउंड में बाइफिकेट करने की कोशिश करें, सो यू विल रियलाइज दैट मनी इन इटसेल्फ इज नॉट टैक्सेबल, बट यूज ऑफ मनी इज टैक्सेबल अंडर जीएसटी. एंड हेंस देयर द क्वेश्चन कम्स इन कि क्या इंटरेस्ट के ऊपर टैक्स लायबिलिटी आती है. सो द थियोरेटिकल आंसर इज यस, कि वो लेवी में तो कवर होता है, बट सब्सिक्वेंटली उसके ऊपर एग्जेम्पशन है, इसलिए उसके ऊपर जीएसटी नहीं पे किया जाता. बट एज सच मनी कभी लेवी में कवर ही नहीं होता, तो उसमें एग्जेम्पशन देने की कोई जरूरत ही नहीं है. Secondly, securities. Bank does deal in securities. They in fact have a separate department or a division for that. Security भी money की equivalent है GST में. It is neither goods nor services. But उसके respect में अगर कोई broking activity है, then that consideration for doing that broking is again treated as a supply of service and it is taxable. Actionable claims, like for example insurance policies, debt securitization, all of these things, they come in the definition of an actionable claim. Again, that is outside the ambit of the definition of service, but rather definition of goods. But again, when you would look at it, you would realize that transaction वो schedule 3 में covered है, but वो actionable claim की respect में अगर कोई premium charge करा गया है कोई बैंक द्वारा, that again it becomes a taxable supply. And the last aspect in this regard is interest, where interest in itself, it looks like that it is within the ambit of GST, but there are various facets of the interest. अगर वो interest time value of money के लिए है, मतलब आज पैसा दिया और वो पैसा कुछ समय बाद बैंक is going to take back, then it's again the time value of money which is exempted. But if interest in any other form, then that interest is not exempted in nature. So we will discuss that in the subsequent time कि कौन सा interest taxable है और कौन सा exempted है GST के अंदर. So ये background में हम जब देखते हैं, तब हम realize करते हैं कि बैंक के केस में बहुत सारे मल्टीपल टाइप ऑफ एक्टिविटीज हैं, और वो मल्टीपल टाइप ऑफ एक्टिविटीज को आइडेंटिफाई करना जरूरी है कि वो टैक्सेबल है कि एग्जेम्प्टेड है. And probably this flow chart or this diagram helps us to identify कि कितने type of facets है banking industry के केस में which are taxable और कितनी चीजें हैं जो exempted है. अगर हम taxable की बात करें, क्या क्या चीजें हैं which you would see profit and loss account में एक बैंकिंग कंपनी के केस में, चाहे वो ब्रांच हो या जोन लेवल हो, जो इनकम साइड पे आ रही हैं चीजें, उसमें से क्या ऐसी चीजें हैं जो आउटवर्ड सप्लाई में क्वालिफाई होती है जीएसटी पर्सपेक्टिव से और उनके ऊपर एग्जेम्पशन नहीं दिया गया है जीएसटी के अंदर. सो इफ यू लुक एट इट, फर्स्ट इज बैंक जितने भी ये डिमांड ड्राफ्ट, बैंक स्टेटमेंट्स या आपको मिनिमम डिपॉजिट बैलेंस मेंटेन करने के लिए जो चार्जेस लेते हैं, these are all taxable and they're taxable at the rate of 18%. No exemption is there. प्री क्लोजर ऑफ ए लोन अकाउंट, कोई लोन प्री क्लोज करने के लिए जो एडिशनल चार्जेस लिए जाते हैं, अगेन दैट इज टैक्सेबल सर्विस एट 18%. कमीशन जो बैंक चार्ज करता है, बी इट फॉर ओपनिंग ऑफ ए लेटर ऑफ क्रेडिट और एनी अदर टाइप ऑफ ए कमीशन, ऑल दोस कमीशंस आर टैक्सेबल इन नेचर. Sometimes banks provide this higher purchase services, or maybe they would basically uh, take any asset, buy it, and then transfer it on a lease basis without transfer of ownership, जिसको हम जनरली हाइपोथिकेशन या हायर परचेज कहते हैं. देन उसका जो प्रीमियम है, उसका जो कंसिडरेशन है, दैट इज टैक्सेबल इन नेचर. Then we have certain specific branches which are dealing in foreign currency management, जिसको हम overseas branch generally कहते हैं. All those who are engaged in basically purchase and sale of foreign currency, then in that, and they are doing that on a retail basis, they are not doing that on a bulk basis. मतलब बैंक टू बैंक ट्रांजेक्शन नहीं है, या बैंक टू मनी चेंजर ट्रांजेक्शन नहीं होके जनरल पब्लिक के साथ जो ट्रांजेक्शन है, दैट इज अगेन टैक्सेबल. अगेन बाइंग एंड सेलिंग ऑफ करेंसी इज नॉट टैक्सेबल, बट वो बाइंग एंड सेलिंग के केस में जो बैंक अपना कंसिडरेशन अर्न कर रहा है, जिसको निकालने का एक स्पेसिफिक वैल्यूएशन रूल दिया है जीएसटी में. So through that rule, you're able to find out the value of the consideration, and that becomes taxable under GST. Then, as I said, all types of interest are not exempted. There are some amount which are being charged by the banks, which has a nomenclature of interest. But when you look at it closely, you will realize that that interest is not against the time value of money, but rather it is kind of a late payment charges, जिसका nomenclature interest दिया गया है, and specifically in respect of a credit card transaction, then in that, which is a very hefty interest, you would not find a normal interest rate applicable. That is also taxable. उसके ऊपर exemption available नहीं है. And then generally we know that all these loan processing charges and documentation charges, they are also taxable in GST. So these are some 7-8 type of transactions which are taxable. Majority of them have a applicable GST rate of 18%, except the point number 4 and point number 8 which you see on your screen. ये वो तरीके के transactions हैं which can classify as supply of goods or as supply of service depending upon कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल नेचर क्या है. और इनका जो जीएसटी रेट है, इट इज गवर्न्ड बाय व्हाट इज द एप्लीकेबल जीएसटी रेट ऑन द अंडरलाइंग गुड्स और द एसेट. तो जो अंडरलाइंग गुड्स और एसेट पे जीएसटी रेट है, वो अगर इवन इफ ए ट्रांजेक्शन सर्विस का ट्रांजेक्शन है, तो उसके ऊपर ही एप्लीकेबल होगी. नो डाउट जो एग्जेम्प्टेड पार्ट है इसके अंदर, इंटरेस्ट ऑन लोन एग्जेम्प्टेड है. वो लोन के ऊपर अगर कोई एडिशनल इंटरेस्ट पे करा है, दैट इज ऑल्सो एग्जेम्प्टेड. एंड एज आई सेड, जो ओवरसीज ब्रांचेस हैं, जो आपस में बैंक टू बैंक या बैंक टू मनी चेंजर डील करते हैं फॉर बाइंग एंड सेलिंग ऑफ करेंसी, उसमें द कंसिडरेशन विच दे आर अर्निंग, जिसको बैंकिंग की भाषा में बल्क ट्रांजेक्शन कहा जाता है, बट नॉट रिटेल ट्रांजेक्शन. तो जो बल्क मनी चेंजिंग के जो ट्रांजेक्शन है, दे आर एग्जेम्प्टेड अंडर जीएसटी. इनफैक्ट ये जो लास्ट ट्रिप है, it has the majority component in the total revenues book of the banking sector, and that is why we have specific norms or provisions applicable for banking and NBFCs in terms of कि वो input tax credit कैसे लेंगे, because वो input tax credit लेने का जो mechanism है, that is dependent on the output side. और आउटपुट साइड में if the majority is exempted, but still you will have certain type of transactions taxable, then वो proportion कैसे निकलेगा, उसके specific rules available हैं. Okay, अब कुछ 1-to-1 heads के बारे में बात करते हैं कि when you would look at the profit and loss account or the trial balance for that matter, तो आपको trial balance में अलग अलग nomenclature का income दिखेगा. Now, obviously, when you would look at it, on the face of it, you would not be able to identify, or banks do not maintain books of account in a manner कि जितने भी GST taxable receipts हैं, उनको एक तरफ क्लब कर दिया, और जितने भी GST non taxable exempted receipts हैं, उनको एक तरफ क्लब कर दिया. But they would have their account as per maybe the accounting code, whatever they have opened, which is being regulated from their head office or the central office. एंड ब्रांचेस के पास में वो अथॉरिटी नहीं है कि वो ERP में जाके उसको चेंज कर सके. Any kind of a change is not possible. So as a branch auditor at your level, you cannot, or you would not be have that facility or that luxury to tell the branch manager to identify कि इसमें से कितनों पे आपने GST दिया और कितनों पे नहीं दिया है. He may not have a ready report for that, but yes, when you would look at the document available in this regard, जब आप document vouch करेंगे, there you should have a pre understanding कि अगर ये nomenclature है तो जनरली इसके रिस्पेक्ट में जीएसटी में प्रोविजंस क्या हैं और क्या वो स्पेसिफिक ब्रांच ने इसके रिस्पेक्ट में जीएसटी के अकाउंटिंग करी होगी या नहीं करी होगी. One thing is very clear that at the branch level, if you're looking at the compliances, because at the end of the day वो ब्रांच का अपना एक सेपरेट जीएसटी नंबर नहीं होगा, बट इट विल बी क्लब टुगेदर ऑन अ स्टेट लेवल. दैट्स द जनरल अंडरस्टैंडिंग. तो अगर स्टेट लेवल पे कंप्लायंस क्लब होके एक कॉमन रिटर्न जा रहा है, which is generally taken by the regional office of that particular state or maybe the zonal office in that particular state. So as an auditor, you would only be able to look at what has happened in the books of account of that particular branch. But you may not have access to, or even if you have access to the GST returns, you may not have the available figures जो एक specific ब्रांच के रिस्पेक्ट में वो जीएसटीआर 3B या जीएसटीआर 1 के अंदर रिपोर्ट हुए होंगे. And hence, as an auditor, because when we are expressing our opinion on the books of account, we are expressing it on the basis of कि books of account में क्या accounting entries हुई. Now in this background, let's look at that exemption entry, जिसके बारे में हम सब जानते हैं कि बैंक जो इंटरेस्ट चार्ज करते हैं जनरली उन लोगों को जिनको मनी लेंड किया जाता है इन फॉर्म ऑफ एनी फॉर्म ऑफ अ लोन, बी इट अ टर्म लोन, बी इट अ सीसी, बी इट एन ओडी और एनी अदर फॉर्म ऑफ अ लोन, उसके ऊपर इंटरेस्ट जो है उस पर टैक्स इसलिए नहीं है बिकॉज एंट्री 27 है एग्जेम्पशन नोटिफिकेशन में, जो ये कहती है कि services by way of extending deposits, loans and advances insofar as the consideration is represented by way of an interest or discount, that is exempted. But उस exemption में से specifically service credit card के respect में जो interest charge किया जा रहा है bank through bank or by the bank, that is not exempted in nature. Then we have a definition of interest also, and it's a very interesting definition because when you look at the definition you realize that time value of money, just purpose say basically the exemption has been given, that is in respect of when a amount or when the money has been given as a deposit or a loan. So the deposit or a loan has to be in form of a money, it should not be in form of kind, and once it is in form of a money as a deposit or a loan which has to be repaid at a future point of time, then उसके रिस्पेक्ट में ये जो टेम्पररी अरेंजमेंट है उसका जो अमाउंट चार्ज करा जा रहा है, that interest is being thought of being covered here. Hence interest on term loan, that is clearly exempted, not leviable to GST. Interest portion in this monthly installment, equal monthly installment, that is also exempted. Additional and a penal interest. Now there is a circular of 2019 where the question was asked कि अगर किसी लेंडर बोरोवर को अगर कोई पैसा दिया गया है and let's say he defaults in making payment of an interest, and because of the default, if let's say there is a levy of an additional interest or a penal interest due to that particular default, then whether that will be exempted or taxable. The circular issued by CBIC says that it will be taxable in nature, and जो exemption या entry 27 के अंदर है उस पे applicable नहीं होगा, because that is not an interest that is being charged because money has been borrowed, but rather it is in nature that the bank has tolerated that particular default, and against tolerating that particular default, this additional consideration has been charged. Bill discounting services, generally there the bank does not charge amount in form of an interest or in the nomenclature of interest, but nomenclature changes, and the change in nomenclature is in the name of discount. But as we just discussed कि interest की definition के अंदर what discount भी covered है time value of money के respect में, that's why that exemption is available. Interest on credit card clearly excluded from the exemption, hence it is taxable in nature. Loan given transaction in money है, ये exemption की जरूरत ही नहीं है ये गुड्स और सर्विस की डेफिनेशन से ही बाहर है. लोन प्रोसेसिंग फी we already discussed, that is taxable in nature. Interest on finance lease, now that's interesting. Interest on finance lease, as we know, there are two types of leases: operating lease and a finance lease. In finance lease, generally for the substantial period of that particular lease, what happens is that asset which is being leased out, it would ultimately at the end of the period, in majority cases, would belong to the person to whom it has been given, the lessee. And here, because ये जो interest है, it is not applicable on the money borrowed, but rather it's kind of a finance lease. Hence ये time value of money का जो concept है उसमें fall नहीं करता, and hence it is taxable in nature. The exemption is not available. So this is one important thing which as an auditor we should be aware of. Reverse repo, repo rate, all of that are interest in nature. That reverse repo and repo rate applicable with respect of the money which has been deposited with bank, or with RBI, or the RBI amount which the branches has to keep. So that is exempted in nature. Loan takeover charges, interest on gold loan, all of them are taxable in nature. No exemption is available. Services, any kind of service which has been given by the bank to RBI, there is no exemption available. Mind you, friends, services by RBI are exempted, but the services to RBI are not exempted, they are taxable in nature. Demand draft charges, bank statement issuance, we have already discussed. Sale of derivative. Sometimes banks are involved in selling of derivatives. Derivatives are covered within the definition of securities under the SCRA Act, and because securities are neither goods nor services, hence this transaction is not taxable. Future contract, again covered in the definition of securities, hence not taxable in nature. फॉरवर्ड कॉन्ट्रैक्ट जिसके अंदर डिलीवरी इन्वॉल्व है, सो देयर इज अ फॉरवर्ड बुक्ड फॉर फ्यूचर वेयर डिलीवरी इज इन्वॉल्व. In that case, this is not a transaction in securities, it's an actual supply transaction, and hence no exemption is available. But those forward contracts which are cancelled before the due date and where the delivery is not being done, उसके रिस्पेक्ट में अगर कोई जो जो अगर उसके रिस्पेक्ट में कोई consideration charge किया जा रहा है by the bank, then in that case it becomes a transaction in securities and hence outside the scope of GST. Promissory notes, they are kind of nothing else but a temporary loan arrangement only, where that the amount which is being charged, the discount or otherwise, is basically interest. It is interest in nature, which is exempted. Sale of debt is, it can be treated as sale of actionable claim or sale of securities depending upon what kind of debts have been sold, जिसको हम डेट सिक्योरिटाइजेशन कहते हैं और टेकिंग ओवर ऑफ डेट कहते हैं. उसके रिस्पेक्ट में जो पेमेंट किया जा रहा है, जिसके बारे में पता नहीं है व्हाट इज गोइंग टू बी द रिकवरी दैट टेक ओवर पर्सन इज गोइंग टू हैव इन रिस्पेक्ट ऑफ द डेट, generally that can fall within the definition of an actionable claim, and hence it would be exempted because actionable claim के ऊपर GST नहीं है barring few. And then sale of a repossessed asset, जहां पे अगर कोई डिफॉल्टर है और उससे वो जो एसेट जिसके अगेंस्ट में लोन दिया गया था उसको हाइपोथेटिकेट करके या उसको कन्फेसिकेट करके या उसका पोजेशन लेके then it has been sold in the open market, then clearly no exemption is available in that regard. तो ये कुछ हेड ऑफ इनकम है जनरली जो आपको एक बैंक के प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस अकाउंट में क्रेडिट साइड पे एज इनकम साइड पे यू वुड बी एबल टू फाइंड. And again, looking at what we have just discussed, you have to analyze whether that particular branch is following the specific provisions in respect of GST or not. नाउ फ्रेंड्स, एक कॉमन अंडरस्टैंडिंग ये है कि ये सारे वो ट्रांजेक्शन्स हैं जिनके बारे में जनरली अ बैंक वुड नो, एंड बिकॉज इट विल बी रेगुलेटेड फ्रॉम द from the head office, there obviously they would have a GST consultant who would form a policy which is being followed down the line in the system till the branch. So generally इनकी non compliance होने की possibility कम है. But one very important thing which as an auditor we should be aware of is that आपको हो सकता है एग्जैक्ट ये नॉमेनक्लेचर वाली जो receipts है which may be properly being taken care of, but on and off generally a branch would enter into a transaction which would be new or which would be unique to that particular branch. Now there it may be possibility that it is one of transactions or that is an exceptional transaction which you would that where you will find the income sitting on the credit side. and their branch has to take a call what needs to be done, where they would wait for the guidance from the head office. And because head office does not treat this as a standard income, so there may be a possibility that no standard instruction would come in that regard. There, as an auditor, if you're aware about the principles under GST or basic provisions, we should be actually, as an auditor, be able to bring out very clearly कि जीएसटी का compliance properly उसके respect में है या नहीं है. And there, for our understanding, these examples which we just discussed, they would be helpful. Now, apart from that exemption entry number 27 जो हमने discuss किया, there are other exemptions which are also given. And just for the sake of understanding, we should be aware about them. Like for example, credit card transactions के case में, where let's say a person who is accepting the payment through a credit card from the payment was the payment made by another person, and the receiving person, when it goes to its own branch for taking out money against that a credit card transaction, and if the value of that particular single transaction is less than 2000 rupees transaction to the credit card, तो जो receiving bank ने जो भी consideration charge किया है और payer bank ने जो actually payment करने वाला है उस credit card के against में, if the gross value of the transaction against that credit card is up to 2000 rupees, then exemption is available for whatever that acquiring bank is going to pay. So there is a monetary limit. उसके beyond अगर मान लीजिए acquiring bank कुछ I'm sorry, उसके against में अगर कोई payment करने वाला acquiring bank, then that is exempted in nature. Then specifically अगर कोई बैंक सर्विसेज दे रहा है in respect of this basic saving bank deposit account holders जिन्होंने प्रधानमंत्री जन धन योजना के तहत जो अकाउंट खोले हैं और उसके रिस्पेक्ट में जो सेविंग बैंक डिपॉजिट के रिस्पेक्ट में अगर बैंक को सर्विस दे रहा है and uske against में they are charging, let's say, any kind of a consideration, then that is also exempted. If let's say there is any service provided by the bank against Atal Pension Yojana, which is also being taken care by them, और उसके रिस्पेक्ट में अगर कोई contribution या remuneration they are earning, that is also exempted in nature. Then services by way of collection of a contribution under pension scheme of the state governments, then वो जो collection service के against में consideration they are charging, maybe from government or any other person, that is also exempted in nature. Then you will find certain banks, and specifically in South India, this is something which is very common, that the supply of gold under the gold loan scheme. In fact, this scheme, not when I say South India, but otherwise also, this scheme is quite a popular scheme amongst the jewelers, where let's say it's kind of a financing for gold. It's a metal loan scheme where a jeweler would approach the bank and it will tell the banks, you see, I need some gold, so you have to allow me to use that, but I'm not going to make the payment of that particular amount. And the price of that, whatever the gold is being fixed for a period of 180 days to 270 days, that is the gold which is being allowed to be purchased under that loan scheme, where the bank would give me the gold. I am the jeweler, where I am required to basically repay, either give the back gold within 180 days to 270 days and I have to pay the interest, or I have to make payment for whatever gold I have received within a period of 6 months to, let's say, 9 months in that particular regard. So there the question comes in कि क्या इसमें जो interest portion है हम उसमें exemption claim कर सकते हैं, या फिर जो loan ये जो gold लिया और अगर gold return कर दिया तो क्या इसके ऊपर exemption available है. Well, generally in cases के अंदर होता ये है that gold is not returned because that gold is actually used by the jeweler to prepare the jewelry being sold in the market, और जो पैसा आता है उससे the payment is being made to the bank, and जो intermediate period रहता है उसका the interest, whatever applicable interest is there, that is being paid to the bank, and that's an income for the bank in this case. So it's a clear case of supply of gold by bank to the jeweler, generally because jewelers are the customer in this case, where the delivery, when it is supply of goods but not a supply of service, the provisions under GST say that the time of removal or at the time of delivery to the customer, you have to raise the invoice. So the invoice is technically required to be raised at the time when the goods has been, the gold has been removed for being used by the jeweler, in this case by the bank. और जो वैल्यू है वो वैल्यू जो इंटरनेशनल और डोमेस्टिक मार्केट के केस में जिस दिन दिया गया गोल्ड उस दिन तय करी जाएगी, और जो भी डिफरेंशियल है एट द एंड ऑफ द पीरियड, जब भी लेट्स से वो गोल्ड रिटर्न नहीं कर रहा है और उसका पेमेंट कर रहा है, तो जो भी डिफरेंशियल है वो क्रेडिट नोट डेबिट नोट के थ्रू सेटल किया जा सकता है. So that is one aspect under the supply of gold under the gold loan scheme, where it has the terminology of a loan, but it is not like a general loan which is being given to a borrower where money is being given and money is taken back, but rather it's gold which is being given, and generally gold will not come back to the bank, but rather against that they will they will receive an interest. Bank is going to receive an interest, and the person who is taking the loan, the gold under the scheme, he is going to pay it back, pay the amount of that particular gold within the stipulated period of time. The next question which comes is कि इसमें जो इंटरेस्ट का पेमेंट किया जाता है स्कीम के अंदर, क्या वो इंटरेस्ट एग्जेम्प्टेड है? And the answer to that is clearly that interest is not exempted. Rather, this interest is part and parcel of the transaction value of the supply of gold which has happened from the bank to the customer. So हम सब जानते हैं that under GST the valuation of a particular supply, either of goods or of service, is being done as per provisions of section 15. और सेक्शन 15 के अंदर एक 15 सबसेक्शन 2 है जो सर्टेन कंपलसरी एडिशंस की बात करता है. सो अभी 15(2)(d) ये कहता है कि अगर किसी तरीके का इंटरेस्ट या लेट पेमेंट या पेनल्टी चार्ज किया गया है फॉर डिलेड पेमेंट ऑफ द कंसिडरेशन फॉर सप्लाई, देन इन दैट केस वो वैल्यू का पार्ट बन जाएगा. सो ये जो इंटरेस्ट है इट इज अकीन टू दैट डिलेड पेमेंट ऑफ द कंसिडरेशन फॉर सप्लाई ऑफ गोल्ड which has happened from the bank to the jeweler, and hence that is why इस interest के ऊपर वही same rate of tax से tax लगेगा जो supply of gold के ऊपर लगा है initially, and the bank would be required to raise a GST debit note in this particular regard to ensure the proper GST compliance. Then banks would have another kind of an income which is called income from commercial papers and certificates of deposit. I'm sure all of us are aware it's a temporary sort of a short loan arrangement which is being allowed in the market, where it's kind of a promissory note through which depositors are approved by the and they are registered with SEBI. इसके रिस्पेक्ट में whatever discount is being charged, ये जो commercial papers या certificate of deposits जहाँ पे the income is by way of a discount, that discount is nothing else but discount for time value of money, चाहे शॉर्ट पीरियड के भी लोन हो, और इसमें जो भी बैंक को कंसिडरेशन मिल रहा है दैट इज एग्जेम्प्टेड इन नेचर. देन कम्स द अनदर सेट ऑफ इनकम जहां पे कुछ स्पेसिफिक ब्रांचेस जो इसमें डील करती हैं. नॉट ऑल ब्रांचेस यू वुड फाइंड हु वुड बी डीलिंग इन दिस टाइप ऑफ ट्रांजैक्शन. दैट्स परचेज एंड सेल ऑफ फॉरेन करेंसी इंक्लूडिंग मनी चेंजिंग. सो देयर आर टू टाइप्स ऑफ एक्टिविटीज व्हिच आर बीइंग टेकन केयर ऑफ by the banks or the specific branches, generally which are like overseas branches or dealing with overseas transaction. When I say overseas branches, I do not mean that branches which are outside India, but those branches which are only dealing in foreign exchange transactions. So they are dedicated branches specifically for this. There generally you would find purchase and sale of foreign currency including money changing. Now पहले इसमें भी दो तरीके के ट्रांजेक्शन हैं. एक ट्रांजेक्शन है जिसको as I said earlier which is called as a bulk transaction between one bank to another bank, or one branch to another branch, or one bank with another authorized dealer as approved by RBI, where they are not having a banking license but they have a license to actually convert foreign exchange in one denomination or one form of currency to another, or they have a license to actually buy foreign currency and sell Indian rupees against that particular amount. तो ये जो दो तरीके के ट्रांजेक्शन है जिनको बल्क ट्रांजेक्शन B2B ट्रांजेक्शन कहते हैं, दे आर एग्जेम्प्टेड. तो उसके रिस्पेक्ट में जो भी कंसिडरेशन है दैट इज एग्जेम्प्टेड इन नेचर. और यही ट्रांजेक्शन जब आपकी मेरे जैसे कस्टमर के साथ किया जाता है, रिटेल कस्टमर हु इज एक्चुअली गोइंग टू बी द यूजर, but he's not actually buying it for the purpose of selling it further in the market, then in that case वो transactions taxable है. So money changing and money buying and selling transactions being done with the customer who do not have an AD license or which is not a banking company in itself are taxable in nature. Apart from that, the other leg of transaction is exempted in nature. Now the interesting part in this case is कि ये जो ट्रांजेक्शन किए जाते हैं इसमें पैसा लिया जाता है और पैसा दिया जाता है. डॉलर दिया जाएगा, उसके अगेंस्ट में इंडियन करेंसी लिया जाएगा और वाइसा वर्सा. और इसमें कोई स्पेसिफिक कंसिडरेशन नहीं होता है. देयर इज नो सेपरेटली आइडेंटिफाइड कंसिडरेशन फॉर द बैंक्स बिकॉज द कंसिडरेशन इज इनबिल्ट इन इट. एंड देयर द इशू कम्स इन कि इस कंसिडरेशन को आइडेंटिफाई कैसे किया जाए. So there are valuation rules which are given under GST, where as per those valuation rules, a deemed value is being identified for the purpose of levying GST. हो सकता है बैंक ने एक पर्टिकुलर ट्रांजेक्शन में वट एवर प्रॉफिट दे वुड हैव अर्न्ड, और मे बी देयर कैन बी अ केस वेयर देयर वुड बी अ लॉस, बट फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ जीएसटी दे हैव टू फॉलो जीएसटी वैल्यूएशन रूल्स, और वैल्यूएशन रूल्स के हिसाब से दे हैव टू फाइंड आउट अ वैल्यू. सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल, जहां पर बाइंग एंड सेलिंग ऑफ फॉरेन करेंसी हो रहा है, वहां पर द प्रोविजंस अंडर जीएसटी से जो बैंक का बाइंग रेट माइनस जो आरबीआई का एक रेफरेंस रेट चलता है फॉर दैट फॉरेन करेंसी इनटू मल्टीप्लाइड बाय जितनी भी यूनिट्स ऑफ करेंसी है, जो वैल्यू आती है उस वैल्यू को हम मानेंगे कि वो एक डीम्ड वैल्यू है फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ लेविंग जीएसटी फॉर दैट बाइंग ऑफ करेंसी. सिमिलरली सेलिंग के केस में बाइंग की जगह सेलिंग का रेट लिया जाता है. सो दैट्स वन सॉर्ट ऑफ अ मैनर इन विच द कैलकुलेशन इज डन. सेकेंड, अगर आरबीआई रेफरेंस रेट अवेलेबल नहीं होता है, देन द प्रोविजन सेज, और जनरली कुछ ऐसी करेंसीज होती हैं जिसके रिस्पेक्ट में आरबीआई रेफरेंस रेट अवेलेबल नहीं है, then in that case the provision says कि 1% of the gross amount जो इंडियन रुपीज में दिया जा रहा है कस्टमर को या लिया जा रहा है कस्टमर से, on that 1% amount that shall be treated as the deemed value for the purpose of levying GST at the rate of 18%. So that's one way of doing the transaction. जहां पर मनी चेंजिंग का काम है, where the money changing is being done, there is one second option which is available, and the option says कि एक स्लैब निकाल देते हैं. लेट्स से अगर कोई आया और वो बोलता है मुझे 1 लाख रुपए के अगेंस्ट में जितना भी फॉरेन करेंसी मिलता है, आई वांट टू बाय दैट, और वाइस वर्सा, दैट अगेंस्ट दैट अमाउंट ऑफ whatever foreign currency is being sold, उसके अगेंस्ट में जो 1 लाख मेरे को मिल रहा है, जो कस्टमर को मिल रहा है, उसके रिस्पेक्ट में बैंक की क्या कंसिडरेशन हो सकता है डीम फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ जीएसटी, तो उसका एक स्लैब रेट है जो जीएसटी रूल्स में दिया गया है, जहां पे 1 लाख तक द प्रोविजन सेज कि उसका 1% या 250 रुपए विच एवर इज हायर वो डीम अज्यूम कर ली जाएगी वैल्यू, और उसके ऊपर 18% टैक्स होगा. सेकेंड होता है कि 1 लाख से 10 लाख के बीच में 1000 रुपए प्लस 0.5 ऑफ द ग्रॉस अमाउंट ऑफ करेंसी एक्सचेंज, और थर्ड 10 लाख से ऊपर का अगर कुछ है तो देन 5500 प्लस 0.10 ऑफ द ग्रॉस अमाउंट ऑफ करेंसी एक्सचेंज, और 60,000 रुपीज विच एवर इज लोअर, उस केस के हिसाब से जीएसटी चार्ज करा जाएगा. नाउ माइंड यू फ्रेंड्स, एज आई सेड अर्लियर, ये एक्चुअल कंसिडरेशन हो ये जरूरी नहीं है, बट बिकॉज कंसिडरेशन आइडेंटिफाई करना बहुत डिफिकल्ट है, बिकॉज ये सब रेट्स के ऊपर डिपेंडेंट है कि क्या रेट चल रहा है उस दिन का और बैंक क्या रेट ऑफर कर रहा है, and to find that out is a very cumbersome task and it is not standardized in nature. That's why these rules are there, where either of the two options a bank can follow. Now as an important thing for an auditor to identify in this case is कि ये जो प्रोविजन दिए गए हैं, ऐसा नहीं लिखा है कि ये प्रोविजन सिर्फ B2C ट्रांजेक्शन मतलब बैंक टू कस्टमर ट्रांजेक्शन या बैंक टू बैंक ट्रांजेक्शन के ऊपर एप्लीकेबल है, और जैसा मैंने बोला बैंक टू बैंक ट्रांजेक्शन एग्जेम्प्टेड है, meaning thereby for these money conversions which takes place, it is invariable that every branch who is actually dealing in these types of transaction, they will have both the types of transaction, B2C and B2B. Because B2B is exempted and B2C is taxable, these slab rates have to be applied for both B2B and B2C to identify deemed exempted value क्या है और deemed taxable value क्या है, क्योंकि डीम टैक्सेबल वैल्यू पे तो 18% जीएसटी लग जाएगा जो कस्टमर से रिकवर किया जा सकता है, बट डीम्ड एग्जेम्प्टेड वैल्यू निकालना इसलिए जरूरी है क्योंकि उसके बेसिस पे आइडेंटिफाई होगा कि वो पर्टिकुलर ब्रांच को अपना इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट कितना रिवर्स करने की जरूरत है. So as an auditor, if you're not able to identify that what is that B2B exempted value which has been identified in the books by the bank, and if they have not prepared a bill of supply for this, then it will be treated as a non-compliance, and this will lead to lesser reversal of the input tax credit against these kind of a transaction. So that is one aspect which you have to take care of and as an auditor when you deal with these specific type of a transactions. Then we come to the concept of place of supply. अगेन दैट्स अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट एंड रेलेवेंट कॉन्सेप्ट, बिकॉज ये डिटरमाइन करता है कि कौन सी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट, मतलब वेयर बेसिकली द टैक्स वुड फ्लो and what type of tax would be leviable on the transaction if the transaction is taxable, whether it will be C plus S or IGST. Now, the provisions for place of supply in respect of banking services which are taxable in nature, the provision says that section 12 जो IGST Act का है वही कहता है कि banking, financial और stock broking services में वो सारी services which are linked to the account of the recipient, then in that case location of the recipient is most important, जो बैंक के records में लिखी गई है, और उसी के हिसाब से that will be determined as the place of supply. और अगर कोई ऐसी सर्विसेज है which are not linked to the account of the recipient, that means for which to receive a service from the bank, the customer is not required to have an account with that particular bank, or that service is on ad hoc basis. It is giving irrespective whether that particular person has an account in the branch or in that bank, or it does not have an account in the bank or the branch. Then in that case, the location, the place of supply changes, और recipient का क्या address है that becomes irrelevant, but place of supply becomes the location of the supplier. जो location of supplier है वही place of supply बन जाता है वो respect के अंदर. So that is the second aspect that needs to be taken care of. अभी ये बैकग्राउंड में सबसे पहला क्वेश्चन आता है कि जो सर्विसेज अकाउंट से लिंक्ड है, जो एक कस्टमर को दी गई है बैंक द्वारा, मल्टीपल टाइप ऑफ सर्विसेज जिसका नॉमेनक्लेचर हमने अभी देखा, उस पर रिकॉर्ड ऑफ द सप्लायर का मतलब, रिकॉर्ड ऑफ द सप्लायर का क्या मतलब है, मतलब बिकॉज बैंक के पास में मल्टीपल टाइप ऑफ रिकॉर्ड्स है, मल्टीपल टाइप ऑफ एड्रेसेस हैं जो उनके सिस्टम में रिकॉर्डेड है, बिकॉज एक अकाउंटिंग रिकॉर्ड है, एक कस्टमर का रिकॉर्ड है, एक केवाईसी का रिकॉर्ड है, एक रिकॉर्ड है आधार के बेस पे, एक रिकॉर्ड है पैन के बेस पे, एक कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस एड्रेस है, एक ऑफिस एड्रेस है, एक एड्रेस है जो ईआरपी में रिकॉर्डेड है, एक एड्रेस है जो डॉक्यूमेंट्स के अंदर रिकॉर्डेड है. एंड बिकॉज बैंक हैज टू डू द ड्यू डिलिजेंस ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर कस्टमर, it ensures that all the possible information of the customer is recorded in their system. And that's where the question comes in कि फिर इन मल्टीपल एड्रेसेस में से रिकॉर्ड ऑफ द सप्लायर में कौन सा एड्रेस माना जाएगा, मतलब बैंक के रिकॉर्ड में कौन सा एड्रेस माना जाएगा. एंड इन अ जनरल अंडरस्टैंडिंग एट द इंडस्ट्री लेवल, जो बैंक्स जनरली प्रैक्टिस फॉलो करते हैं, बिकॉज नाउ देयर इज दिस कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ हैविंग अ सिंगल आईडी, कस्टमर आईडी, एंड बिकॉज एक कस्टमर आईडी के ऊपर एक एड्रेस टैग्ड होता है, सो मे बी डाउन द लाइन मल्टीपल एड्रेसेस अवेलेबल होंगे, पर ईआरपी के अंदर जो बैंक वट एवर ईआरपी दे आर मेंटेनिंग देयर बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट, उसके अंदर जो भी कस्टमर का एड्रेस टैग्ड है in the ERP, that shall technically be treated as the record of the supplier. So it may have a different KYC address, it may have a different PAN address, it may have a different office address, but the address which is recorded in the ERP, that will actually determine कि location of the recipient क्या है in respect of all those services जो customer के account से linked है. और कस्टमर से क्या अकाउंट से लिंक सर्विसेज में, क्योंकि हमारा प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई डिपेंडेंट है कि कस्टमर का एड्रेस क्या है, एंड दैट बिकम्स मोर इम्पोर्टेंट. यहां पर इट इज इंपॉर्टेंट टू मेंशन कि एक सीबीआईसी का सर्कुलर है व्हिच आल्सो सेज कि अगर लेट्स से बैंक के पास में मल्टीपल एड्रेसेस हैं, देन इन दैट केस बैंक करना क्या चाहिए, वेयर सीबीआईसी सेज इन दैट केस जो कस्टमर अगर जीएसटी में रजिस्टर्ड है, तो जीएसटीएन के हिसाब से जो एड्रेस आ रहा है, टेक्निकली यू टेक दैट एड्रेस एज द एड्रेस ऑफ द कस्टमर रिकॉर्डेड इन द बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट ऑफ देयर बैंक. Hence, wherever a bank has multiple addresses, but अगर कस्टमर जीएसटी में रजिस्टर्ड है और उसके ऊपर इनवॉइस रेज करना है जिसके ऊपर देयर इज एप्लीकेबिलिटी ऑफ जीएसटी, एंड द सीबीआईसी सर्कुलर सेज कि वो जीएसटी में जो भी एड्रेस लिखा है, irrespective wherever the customer is, doesn't matter, that address linked with the GSTIN of the customer should be treated as the address of the recipient, और उसके हिसाब से place of supply transaction का determine होना चाहिए. In all other cases, it has to be the location of the bank which is giving the service. If let's say the customer is outside India, अगर ऐसी कोई branch है again which is where the customer is outside India, the provision says, provision first section 12 नहीं लगता है IGST Act का, section 13 applicable है. So this is one aspect which as an auditor you should be aware of, that if the customer is located in India, to identify place of supply you will read section 12. If the customer is located outside India, then in that case, to identify place of supply, you will read section 13 subsection 8A. 13(8)(a) ये कहता है कि अगर कोई बैंक अपने अकाउंट होल्डर को सर्विस दे रहा है, then in that case अकाउंट होल्डर का एड्रेस इज नॉट रेलेवेंट, बट द प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई शैल बी द लोकेशन ऑफ द बैंक. सो यहां पर बिल्कुल उल्टा है. अगर कस्टमर इंडिया के बाहर है और सर्विसेज अकाउंट से लिंक्ड है, then in that case the place of supply shall always be what is the location of the bank, and it will always be India, and hence it will never be treated as export of services. For all the services which are not linked to the account holder, मतलब अकाउंट होल्डर होना जरूरी नहीं है वो सर्विसेज के लिए, जिसकी लिस्ट इज देयर ऑन योर स्क्रीन. For example, financial leasing, asset management, advice on mergers, or bank to or basically money changing, जिसके रिस्पेक्ट में अकाउंट होना जरूरी नहीं है उस पर्टिकुलर ब्रांच में. देयर ए जनरल रूल वुड फॉलो कि कस्टमर का एड्रेस अगर इंडिया के बाहर का आ रहा है और जो कंसिडरेशन बैंक को मिल रहा है अगर वो फॉरेन करेंसी में मिल रहा है, देन इट कैन बी ट्रीटेड एज एन एक्सपोर्ट ऑफ सर्विस. सो यू विल रियलाइज कि कस्टमर अगर इंडिया में है तो सेक्शन 12 अलग बात करता है. तभी बोलता है कि कस्टमर अगर अकाउंट रिलेटेड सर्विसेज है और कस्टमर का अकाउंट है, देन इन दैट केस वो एड्रेस माना जाएगा. नॉन अकाउंट रिलेटेड सर्विस है तो बैंक का लोकेशन माना जाएगा. और यही चीज जब हम सेक्शन 13 पढ़ते हैं जहां पे कस्टमर इज आउटसाइड इंडिया, तो अगर अकाउंट रिलेटेड है, देन इन दैट केस द प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई शैल बी द लोकेशन ऑफ द बैंक, एंड इट विल नेवर बी ट्रीटेड एज द export of service. The total vice versa situation is there in this regard. Now with this, we come to input tax credit provision. Input tax credit, again at the branch level, it may be difficult because generally when a compliance would happen at the state level, they would actually take it together and do the compliance at the zonal level, but still it depends how the accounting is being done in the books of account of the branches, because technically if there is any credit which a branch has to take, there in that case पहले उस credit को necessary ITC ledger को hit करना जरूरी है. Then only they'll be able to actually consolidate and put that in our GST returns depending upon क्या reversal वो follow करना चाहते हैं. As I already said in the initial remarks, that majority of the incomes in case of banking is exempted. That is why यहाँ पर complete ITC banking company को मिलना impossible है. They have to proportionately reverse the ITC. So one formula is the general formula which is applicable for everybody, जिनको अपना ITC turnover के proportion में reverse करने की जरूरत है. Now that's a very cumbersome process. उसमें एक rule 42 लगता है in respect of input and input services, और एक बड़ी detailed calculation है which generally a bank has to follow. In my personal experience, barring maybe one or two instances, I have never seen banks following this rule 42, but rather what they follow is the option 2 which is available, where the section 17 gives them an option कि बैंक्स के पास में फिर एक ऑप्शन है कि वो चाहे तो सिर्फ 50% क्रेडिट ले अपनी इनपुट सर्विसेज कैपिटल गुड्स का. सो एक्सेप्ट डिस्टिंक्ट पर्सन से जो ट्रांजेक्शन है, ब्रांच टू ब्रांच जो ट्रांजेक्शन हो रहा है, जहां पर बैंक का दूसरे स्टेट का कोई ब्रांच अगर कोई सप्लाईज के रिस्पेक्ट में, डीम सप्लाईज के रिस्पेक्ट में कोई इनवॉइस रेज कर रहा है, उसका 100% क्रेडिट ले ले, और बाकी बचे हुए जितने भी नॉर्मल जो थर्ड पार्टी सप्लाई से गुड्स और सर्विसेज मिल रहे हैं, उसका अगर 50% बैंक क्रेडिट ले ले, सब्जेक्ट टू वो जो पर्टिकुलर बैंक है, इट शुड बी ऑब्वियसली डीलिंग in having an interest income on deposits, which invariably every bank would have because that's the main bread and butter of the bank. There they have an option to claim 50% ITC on the input services, irrespective उनका exempted और taxable का ratio क्या है. तो exempted 90% है, 50% है, 40%, that doesn't matter. If they follow this, for them the compliance is comparatively easier. It is very easy and transparent for them to do this. So what they have to do is they have to find out total input tax credit. उसमें से जितना भी block credit है वो हटाना है, जितना भी अदर ब्रांच से क्रेडिट आना है वो हटाना है, क्योंकि अदर ब्रांच वाला 100% मिलना है, ब्लॉक वाला बिल्कुल नहीं मिलना है. बचा हुआ जो बैलेंस क्रेडिट है दैट बिकम्स द एलिजिबल क्रेडिट. वो एलिजिबल क्रेडिट अगर जीएसटीआर 2B के अंदर आ रहा है, दैट्स द सेकंड चेक. अगर वो क्रेडिट जीएसटीआर 2B के अंदर आ रहा है, देन इन दैट केस व्हाटएवर इज बीइंग मैच्ड उसका 50% दे कैन क्लेम, प्लस जो अदर ब्रांच से क्रेडिट टैक्स लग के आया उसका 100% दे शुड बी एबल टू क्लेम, और वो उनकी जीएसटीआर 3B के अंदर जा सकता है. Now again at the branch level, what really needs to be done and taken care of is कि बैंक ने या ब्रांच ने उसका अकाउंटिंग इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट के हेड में किया हो, प्लस टू बी का रिकंसिलेशन हाउ इज बिंग अकाउंटिंग डन, बिकॉज व्हाट विल जनरली हैपन कि कुछ क्रेडिट टू बी में नहीं आएगा. Maybe that reconciliation would be again done at the zonal level or the regional office level at one GST and by one particular GST team. बट उसका इम्पैक्ट ब्रांचेस के अंदर कैसे आ रहा है, हाउ दैट अकाउंटिंग एंट्री इज बीइंग डन इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. बिकॉज आप जो ऑडिट कर रहे हैं, यू आर योर स्कोप इज रिस्ट्रिक्टेड टू दैट पर्टिकुलर ब्रांच. तो ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि जितना भी क्रेडिट अवेलेबल है वो सारा एलिजिबल क्रेडिट मानते हुए, इररिस्पेक्टिव टू बी में है या नहीं है, उसको एलिजिबल क्रेडिट मानते हुए ट्रांसफर कर दिया गया, एंड देन द ब्रांच इज लीस्ट बॉदर्ड वेदर वो टू बी में मैच हो रहा है या नहीं हो रहा है. For the fairness and for the correct depiction of that particular expense or eligible ITC of the particular branch, whatever reconciliation is being done at the zonal level or at the regional branch at the region level, whatever non-matching is there, it has to come back and it has to sit somewhere in the trial balance of that particular branch. So that accounting entry needs to be checked. But yes, the provision under GST says जहाँ पे rule 38 applicable है कि जो आपका जितना भी क्रेडिट है एक्सेप्ट कमिंग फ्रॉम द अदर ब्रांच ऑफ द सेम पैन, उसका 50% यू कैन क्लेम एंड यू कैन हैव अ वेरी हैप्पी एंड इजी लाइफ इन दैट पर्टिकुलर रिगार्ड. We come to last few topics, that is documentation. I think this is that one aspect which here as an auditor you can be very vigilant, and I think you can raise the necessary objections or the observations to be taken care at the higher level, at the zonal, at the regional level. कि डॉक्यूमेंटेशन कैसा है, बिकॉज गुड्स के रिस्पेक्ट में कोई भी रिलैक्सेशन नहीं है. जहां जहां भी ब्रांचेस अपने एसेट डिस्पोज ऑफ कर रहे हैं, एसेट सेल कर रहे हैं, या लेट्स से गोल्ड सेल कर रहे हैं, या किसी भी तरीके के गुड्स में डील कर रहे हैं, वहां पे दे आर कंपल्सरी रिक्वायर्ड टू प्रिपेयर अ टैक्स इनवॉइस. और वो टैक्स इनवॉइस उनको प्रिपेयर करके दे हैव टू इंश्योर कि अगर उसके साथ में ई वे बिल एप्लीकेबल है तो ई वे बिल इज बीइंग आल्सो प्रिपेयर्ड. Mind you, friends, e-invoicing is not applicable on a banking company, and there is a recent circular which says it is not applicable for every type of a transaction. So that means बैंक के केस में e-invoicing होना जरूरी नहीं है, but still that does not mean that they are not required to prepare a tax invoice. They have to prepare a proper tax invoice. और goods के केस में tax invoice is required to be prepared at the time of supply only, whenever removal is happening from that particular branch. In respect of services, there the time limit of 30 days which is there in general provision, 30 days from the date of the completion of a service, वहां पर बैंक्स के केस में 45 days का टाइम लिमिट अवेलेबल है. सो दे आर नॉट रिक्वायर्ड टू रेज इनवॉइस विद इन 30 days, बट दे कैन हैव एन एडिशनल टाइम लिमिट ऑफ 45 days टू रेज एन इनवॉइस. इनफैक्ट अगर एक डिस्टिंक्ट पर्सन, एक दूसरा जीएसटीएन उसी सेम बैंक का अपने दूसरे जीएसटीएन के ऊपर किसी भी तरीके की बिलिंग करता है, जिसको हम जीएसटी की भाषा में क्रॉस चार्ज कहते हैं इन रिस्पेक्ट ऑफ सर्विसेज, उसके लिए 45 डेज का भी टाइम नहीं है. उसके लिए बिलिंग कैन बी डन विद इन अ क्वार्टर, दैट इज 3 months टाइम इज अवेलेबल. सो दो अलग अलग टाइम लिमिट है फॉर इशूइंग अ टैक्स इनवॉइस. e-invoicing is not applicable. There is one more relaxation which is applicable in respect of banking services, banking companies, where they are not required to actually issue one tax invoice against one particular supplier or for one specific transaction, but they can have one consolidated tax invoice at the end of the month for the supplies which has been made to the customer. तो एक पूरे महीने का एक कंसोलिडेटेड टैक्स इनवॉइस वो बना सकते हैं. जरूरी नहीं है कि वो सीरियली नंबर्ड भी हो. सो दैट इज आल्सो वन इंपॉर्टेंट रिलैक्सेशन व्हिच हैज बीन गिवन टू देम. Yet it does not mean that their tax invoice will not have a distinctive unique number. The tax invoice or whatever document they're issuing, it should have a distinctive identification number, unique number. It may not be serially numbered कि पिछले कस्टमर को 1 दिया, अगले को 2 दिया, अगले को 3 दिया, बट ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि 1 नंबर का डॉक्यूमेंट 2 कस्टमर्स को देते. दैट्स नॉट पॉसिबल. एंड इट इज नॉट नेसेसरी दैट the invoice will not contain the address of the recipient. मतलब it may not be mandatory कि recipient का address लिखा हो उसके अंदर, बट जो बाकी और डिटेल्स है जो रूल 46 में हमने देखा है जनरल टैक्स इनवॉइस के अंदर होती है, दैट शुड बी अवेलेबल. दैट इज वाई यू विल सी कि जनरली बैंक्स के केस में जहां पर जीएसटी चार्ज करा जाता है बैंक चार्जेस वगैरह के ऊपर, they are either they will issue an advice to which they will call it is a tax invoice under rule 54, but you have to ensure that it all with all the exceptions which are mentioned कि वो 45 days में issue हो सकता है, it may not be serially numbered, yet it should have other details like GST of the bank, address of the bank, name of the bank, details of whatever it is, their HSN code, all of things should be there on the invoice or that document which is being issued in whatever name, and uska naam kuch bhi rakha ho, but that shall be a document in lieu of a tax invoice, which would be a proper compliance. If it is not there, it is your responsibility as an auditor that you flag this off, because not issuing a proper document under GST, it can be treated as an offense and it can attract penalty under the provisions of GST. As I already said, e-invoicing is not applicable on the banking company and it is not applicable for any type of transaction. So you need not actually check कि उन्होंने e-invoice issue किया या नहीं किया. However, बैंक अगर किसी ट्रांजेक्शन के ऊपर इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट ले रहा है और जो सप्लायर है अगर वो इंश्योरेंस कंपनी, बैंकिंग कंपनी, फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन या जीटीए नहीं है, then in that case बैंक को वो इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट लेने के लिए they have to ensure that it should be an e-invoice. और ई इनवॉइस सप्लायर को इशू करना था नहीं करना था, हाउ कैन यू चेक? You can just take GST number of the supplier, go to the e-invoicing website, put the GST number, and you would be able to find out whether e-invoicing is applicable to them or not. There is another data which is coming from the NIC, जहां पे आप NIC की वेबसाइट पे जाके देख सकते हैं, फोर्टनाइटली ये डेटा निकलता है कि कौन लोग हैं जिन्होंने ई इनवॉइसिंग करी है पिछले फोर्टनाइट के अंदर एक नहीं. So maybe on the income side you need not check, but on the recipient side where their bank is taking input tax credit, it is important that they are taking credit on a proper valid tax invoice. And if the supplier is duty bound to issue an e-invoice, then the supplier is issuing that. Otherwise, maybe bank is taking the credit on an ineligible document, तो एक normal eligible document पे credit नहीं ले रहा है. Whether bank, and there is a FAQ on banking, insurance and stockbroking sector issued by CBIC, where the question is कि अगर बैंक ने किसी ट्रांजेक्शन को B2C कर दिया है तो क्या वो B2C से उसको बाद में B2B कर सकते हैं? And again the answer which has been given by another FAQ is that it is not possible. Once a transaction has been reported as B2C, then later on B2B it cannot be added. And that's where real challenge lies, that at the banking level it's very difficult to actually change the nature of the transaction in that particular regard. Last, coming to reverse charge compliances, bank के case में where bank has to pay tax under RCM, there are three unique type of transaction apart from regular transaction जिसमें reverse charge applicable है. So if you look at from the banking perspective, three transactions: services supplied by a recovery agent, where recovering agents are being hired by them, so that's applicable under reverse charge. जो DSAs होते हैं, if they're individual DSAs, so if there is a DSA which is a private limited LLP partnership, उस पे reverse charge नहीं है. But individual DSAs, if they're giving services to the bank, that is taxable under reverse charge. और जो एक बैंक facilitator एक बैंक को सर्विस देता है, that again which is referred to the Banking Regulation Act, that is also taxable under reverse charge. तो ये तीन specific banking company के respect में transactions हैं जिसमें reverse charge की compliance करना जरूरी है. Again to remind you, ये compliance हो सकता है zonal level पे हो to discharge the tax and to claim the credit, but इसका necessary accounting entry has to happen at the branch level. One other important thing in respect of reverse charge is, reverse charge का input tax credit तभी लिया जा सकता है अगर supplier unregistered है, जो service देने वाला है, if he or she is unregistered, and the recipient, let's say as a bank, is paying tax under reverse charge, then the credit can only be taken where bank has prepared a purchase invoice under section 31(3)(f) of the CGST Act. तो अगर परचेज इनवॉइस नहीं बनाया है, या आप इफ यू आस्क फॉर इट फ्रॉम द पर्टिकुलर ब्रांच एंड द डॉक्यूमेंट इज नॉट अवेलेबल, देन देयर इज अ प्रॉब्लम. द प्रॉब्लम इज रूल 36 ऑफ द सीजीएसटी रूल्स ये कहता है कि देन यू आर एलिजिबल टू ओनली क्लेम क्रेडिट ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ अ प्रॉपर डॉक्यूमेंट. And because in reverse charge the proper document where supplier is unregistered is the purchase invoice, और अगर purchase invoice नहीं है तो credit eligible नहीं है. So again, as an auditor, it becomes an important flag, important point to actually report that if it is not available, then the credit taken is invalid and not correct. Then one more aspect which is important is, let's say sometimes bank gives certain types of privileges to their premium customers, and they generally waive a lot of charges or other amounts which are which are applicable. So it may happen कि एक कस्टमर से कोई स्पेसिफिक टाइप ऑफ ट्रांजेक्शन के अगेंस्ट में कोई फी नहीं लिया गया, और एक दूसरे कस्टमर से उसी के अगेंस्ट में काफी हेफ्टी फी लिया गया है. Now it all depends upon the nature of a business, commerce of it, वो कस्टमर का क्रेडिट रेटिंग कैसा है, कितना पुराना कस्टमर है, what kind of a business that customer is bringing to the bank. So there is one question in the FAQs which is issued by CBIC, and the question is कि क्या इसके रिस्पेक्ट में वैल्यूएशन प्रोविजंस एप्लीकेबल हो सकते हैं, और क्या जीएसटी अगर एप्लीकेबल है उस चार्जेस के ऊपर, तो एक डीम्ड वैल्यू के ऊपर जीएसटी पे करने की जरूरत है क्या. एंड द आंसर टू दैट इज कि अगर कस्टमर बैंक का रिलेटेड पार्टी नहीं है, देन इन दैट केस देयर इज नो सच रिक्वायरमेंट कि उसका वैल्यूएशन एडजस्टमेंट करने की जरूरत हो, बिकॉज ये ट्रांजेक्शन एक दो अनरिलेटेड पार्टी के बीच में है, एंड देयर इज नो सच रिक्वायरमेंट कि अलग जो जिससे कम अमाउंट चार्ज किया गया है उसकी वैल्यू इन्फ्लुएंस हो ज्यादा अमाउंट वाले से. So again, that concessional differential rate which is being charged, if it is not a related party, that customer is not a related party, then really as an auditor from a GST perspective, it may not be a relevant red flag which you have to take care of. Sometimes what happens, a loan or an account turns bad, it turns into an NPA. तो पैसा तो आया नहीं, उसके साथ में जो चार्जेस बैंक ने ड्यू कर रखे थे उन पे भी नहीं, दे आर नॉट रिकवरिंग. But the problem is when they have issued a document for the charges, they would have charged applicable GST. So the question is, क्या बैंक उस GST को रिवर्स कर सकता है? अगर वो चार्जेस तो रिवर्स कर रहा है जब वो NPA की प्रोविजनिंग कर रहा है या लेट्स से राइट ऑफ कर रहा है, तो क्या वो एप्लीकेबल जीएसटी को भी रिवर्स कर सकता है या उसका रिफंड ले सकता है? देयर जीएसटी प्रोविजंस आर वेरी क्लियर. क्रेडिट नोट इशू करके ही जीएसटी का जो आउटपुट टैक्स पे करा गया था उसको रिवर्स करा जा सकता है, बट क्रेडिट नोट इशू करने के सर्टेन इंस्टेंसेस हैं, एंड बैड डेट इज नॉट सच इंस्टेंस ड्यू टू विच जीएसटी पेड टू द गवर्नमेंट कैन बी रिवर्स्ड. Only when it is being identified that GST was paid due to the reason that maybe there is a change in contractual agreement with the customer, or you have bank has charged excess tax, or the taxable value was excess, or there was a deficiency in the service, then only in that case GST can be reversed. वो भी एक certain time limit के अंदर है, साल खत्म होने के 10 महीने, up till 30th of November from the end of the financial year. Apart from that, specifically in respect of bad debts, no benefit of GST can be taken care of. So as an auditor, it's a red flag. अगर bad debts के respect में writing off हुआ है, तो GST का reversal नहीं होना चाहिए. Once that GST has been paid or it is due for payment to the government, that needs to be paid. Benefit of that cannot be claimed back by the particular bank. Wherever an auction of an asset takes place, where bank may not be the legal owner of the asset, still whenever that auction is being done, as per the provisions of GST, it's still a supply of goods. So जरूरी नहीं है कि गुड्स का जब ऑक्शन हो रहा हो तो बैंक को उसका लीगल ओनर होना जरूरी है. अगर बैंक अपना जो लोन का पैसा है वो रिकवर कर रहा है बाय ऑक्शनिंग द एसेट whose possession has been taken over by the bank, then in that case still it will be treated as a supply of goods. और जो provision supply of goods पे applicable है वो auction के respect में जो पैसा recover करने वाला है बैंक, it would be applicable in that particular regard. However, एक benefit available है second hand goods, because all these goods would be second hand goods जहां पर बैंक auction कर रहा है उन कुछ को, and because बैंक ने इसके ऊपर input tax credit नहीं लिया होगा at the time of purchase, because that would have been claimed by the borrower जिसने एक्चुअली इन एसेट्स के हाइपोथेटिकेट करा के उसके अगेंस्ट में लोन लिया था, एंड बिकॉज ही हैज टर्न बैक बैड एंड नाउ बैंक इज टेकिंग ओवर, वहां पर जब बैंक ये एसेट को सेल करने जा रहा है, देयर इज अ बेनिफिट अवेलेबल इन जीएसटी वैल्यूएशन रूल्स. वो ये कहता है कि जब से बैंक ने पोजीशन लिया और जब तक वो सेल कर रहा है, वहां से एवरी क्वार्टर 5% का वो डिडक्शन क्लेम करते हुए, और एवरी क्वार्टर वॉट एवर डिडक्शन इज देयर वो क्लेम करके जो भी डिफरेंशियल वैल्यू आती है ऑन विच इट कैन पे टैक्स. So there is a calculation, which is a very simple mathematical calculation which one can take care of. The important point from the auditor's perspective is कि इसके ऊपर जो एप्लीकेबल जीएसटी होगा दैट विल बी द रेट एप्लीकेबल ऑन द सेल ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर गुड्स, बट नॉट स्टैंडर्ड रेट ऑफ 18%. Distinct person I'm not covering because that's very specific kind of a transaction, so I'm ignoring it for the time being. Um, Last is foreign bank charges. Now that's a very interesting thing. Again, you might find that in specific branches, but wherever an exporter, let's say, has an exposure in the bank, और exporter अपना कोई पैसा अपनी ब्रांच अपनी बैंक के थ्रू मंगवा रहा है और वो बैंक ट्रांजेक्ट कर रही है एक्सपोर्टर के कस्टमर से आउटसाइड इंडिया और उसकी बैंक के साथ में, so generally there are two types of charges. One is a normal banking charge, second is a foreign bank charges. Foreign bank charges are those charges जो एक्सपोर्टर का कस्टमर बैठा है इंडिया के बाहर, वो कस्टमर का जो बैंक पैसे चार्ज कर रहा है for allowing the payment by that person sitting outside India to India. So generally, the terms which are there is that that amount has to be borne by the Indian customer. That's or the amount is being deducted from the amount which is to be paid to the Indian customer or the exporter. अब इंडियन बैंक बोलता है कि वो पैसे का एक्सपोजर इंडियन एक्सपोर्टर को बेयर करना पड़ेगा, तो फॉरेन बैंक इंडियन बैंक का पैसा काटता है और इंडियन बैंक एक्सपोर्टर का पैसा काटता है. Now the problem is in this case the service is being provided by the bank sitting outside India. The question which comes is who is the recipient of the service, whether it is the Indian bank or it is the Indian exporter. Because if Indian bank is the service recipient, तो उसके ऊपर रिवर्स चार्ज में टैक्स एप्लीकेबल है, एंड इफ इंडियन एक्सपोर्टर इज द रिसिपिएंट तो एक्सपोर्टर को टैक्स पे करने की जरूरत है. नो ये इशू जो है, ये इशू के ऊपर बहुत सारा लिटिगेशन है ऑलरेडी. इसके ऊपर क्लैरिटी दो अलग अलग तरीके से है. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल एक ट्रेड नोटिस है जो ये कहता है दैट इंडियन बैंक विल बी ट्रीटेड एज अ रिसिपिएंट और इंडियन बैंक को रिवर्स चार्ज में टैक्स पे करना है. 2013 का मुंबई कमिश्नरेट का सर्कुलर है. Whereas एक 2021 का दिल्ली ट्राइब्यूनल का जजमेंट है जो कहता है इंडियन बैंक इज नॉट द रिसिपिएंट बट एक्सपोर्टर इज द रिसिपिएंट. और एक मद्रास हाई कोर्ट का डिसीजन है जो कहता है इंडियन एक्सपोर्टर रिसिपिएंट नहीं है. So you will find three different set of ideologies given. One tribunal judgment which is in favor of bank, one high court judgment which is in favor of the exporter, and one trade circular under the service tax regime by the Chief Commissioner Central Excise Mumbai Zone 1 which is in favor of the exporter. If you look at it, it is a situation where probably one can take a view that neither the Indian exporter nor the Indian bank is required to pay the tax, because service actually has not been availed by either of them, but rather it's an amount which has been deducted from them जिसका burden उनको bear करने की जरूरत है. But again, that position might be a little aggressive position, and hence looking at your wisdom how do you interpret the provisions of the law, you might have to take the call. But in reality it's a good case to argue by saying that इसमें दोनों को ही रिवर्स चार्ज में टैक्स पे करने की जरूरत नहीं है. So I think we have covered almost everything. Yeah, maybe this would be the last slide. That foreclosure of loan account. Yes, that's also one thing. अगर आप स्टार्टिंग में देखेंगे तो मैंने इसके ऊपर बात करके कहा था कि एक सर्विस है जिसमें 18% टैक्स लगता है. बट हाउएवर इसके ऊपर एक जजमेंट है लार्जर बेंच का, ट्राइब्यूनल का, जो कहता है इट इज फॉर्म ऑफ डैमेजेस और रिकवरी अगेंस्ट अ डैमेज एंड इट्स अ कंडीशन ऑफ द कॉन्ट्रैक्ट. जब भी कोई बैंक के साथ में कॉन्ट्रैक्ट या लेट्स से कोई फाइनेंस कंपनी के साथ में कॉन्ट्रैक्ट एग्जीक्यूट हो रहा है और फोरक्लोजर किया जा रहा है, तो बैंक इज बेसिकली नॉट अलाउइंग द फोरक्लोजर अगेंस्ट टू अर्न दैट फोरक्लोजर चार्जेस, but it's kind of a penalty which they are levying, which has been pre-decided and mentioned in the loan agreement, and it's a favorable judgment that there is no liability to pay GST or service tax on the same. However, we have a recent circular number 178 under GST which says that is leviable to GST. So note again, it's a circular issued by board. How much sanctity it has that needs to be checked in the high court. But अगर आप आज का सिचुएशन देखेंगे तो सिचुएशन ये है, सर्विस टैक्स रिजीम में एक जजमेंट है जो कहता है इस पे सर्विस टैक्स नहीं लगेगा बिकॉज प्रोविजन जीएसटी में पैरा मटीरियल है. वन कैन टेक दैट व्यू, बट रिसेंटली कुछ महीने पहले बोर्ड ने अगस्त 2022 में एक सर्कुलर इशू करके बोला कि नो अकॉर्डिंग टू देम इट इज टैक्सेबल अंडर जीएसटी. सो वन हैज टू रियली टेक केयर ऑफ व्हाट नीड्स टू बी डन. I think with this probably I thought of covering all the aspects in the given period of time. I did not want to go in the details because as I said in the starting, हम जब ऑडिट कर रहे हैं, वी आर ऑलरेडी रेसिंग अगेंस्ट द टाइम, so you have a limited time. And because the main focus is not on GST, so obviously you need not be an expert in this regard, but yes, you should be aware of the basic provisions. You should be able to find it out that whether the procedural compliance has been properly done or not. There should not be any basic non-compliance principally. And that's where probably you will be more comfortable when you will be dealing with the books of account, when you will be doing the bank audits. I would again like to thank CA Sansaar family for giving me this wonderful opportunity, and I would wish all the best to all my colleagues, friends for this coming upcoming season of bank audits. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yash ji, for such a wonderful presentation. And you have rightly said we should not be expert in the GST, but yes, we have to see whether the procedural compliances are there or not. If anybody have any queries, then you can post it. I think one query is there. Hmm. Section 13(8) IGST read with
It's
explanation.
a Yeah, it's a good question. The question which is asking is कि अगर 13(8) के हिसाब से टैक्स लगना है जहाँ पे कस्टमर इंडिया के बाहर है और अकाउंट रिलेटेड सर्विस है, तो CGST SGST लगेगा या IGST लगेगा? My understanding says it will be an intrastate transaction. It can't be an intrastate transactions. No doubt place of supply and location of supplier are both in India. बट आप जब इसको सेक्शन 7 और सेक्शन 8 के साथ में पढ़ेंगे, इट शुड बी लेविएबल टू IGST बट नॉट CGST SGST.
Okay. Yeah, not so much queries are there, so I think we should wind up. एक बार देख लेते हैं within a minutes अगर कोई query है तो. Yes. So thank you very much. So and once again to everyone, happy bank branch auditing. And Yash ji ne rightly said कि every chartered accountant directly or indirectly involved in the bank branch audit. So we can only wish to all of you कि happy bank branch audit. So even our webinars will be there. Sunday को भी we are going to conduct a webinar on the agriculture advances. बाकी videos तो on daily basis you will get it. And if you have any further queries regarding the GST are related to bank branch audit, except कि bank branch audit मिलेगा कैसे, that's not in our hand. बाकी we can solve your queries either related to the general compliances, GST compliances. So once again, my sincere thanks to Yash ji for
My
such a
pleasure.
wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining us. Bye bye. Take care. Thank you, sir.